Silence had weight up here. It pressed against the cabin the same way the snow did. Thick, relentless, unmoving. The Rockies rose around Ethan Hale's home like ancient sentinels, their slopes buried beneath layers of white that swallowed sound and memory alike. At 40, Ethan had learned the difference between quiet and silence. Quiet was the absence of noise. Silence was the absence of purpose. This place was full of the latter. The cabin sat alone on a narrow shelf of land carved into the mountainside, miles from the nearest road, farther still from the nearest person. It wasn't built for comfort. It was built to endure. Rough-hewn timber walls, a single iron stove, a cot pushed against the far wall, and a table scarred by years of use. Nothing decorative, nothing unnecessary, nothing that asked questions. Ethan preferred it that way. He moved through the space with the efficiency of a man who had lived too long in places where hesitation got people killed. Broad shoulders filled out a faded flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms. His hands were scarred, knuckles thickened by years of impact and weather. A short, neatly kept beard framed his jaw, streaked with early gray, that the mirror above the sink reflected without judgment. His eyes, blue-gray and heavy, rarely lingered on their own reflection. They had seen enough. The kettle on the stove began to rattle. Ethan lifted it off the heat, poured water into a chipped mug, and took a slow sip. Outside, the wind moved through the pines like a low warning, bending branches under the promise of more snow.
A storm was coming. He knew that the way sailors know the sea, by feel, not forecast. At his feet, shadow shifted. The German Shepherd was 6 years old, black and tan fur threaded with silver around the muzzle and shoulders. He rose slowly, favoring his right hind leg, the old injury flaring whenever the temperature dropped. His ears pricked toward the window, posture alerts but controlled. Shadow had learned long ago that not every threat announced itself loudly. Ethan followed the dog's gaze, eyes narrowing slightly. "Yeah," he murmured, voice rough from disuse. "I feel it too." Shadow had served beside him through 2 deployments. He carried his own scars in quiet ways, a limp on cold mornings, a soft whine when thunder echoed too closely to memory. They understood each other without ceremony. 2 survivors who no longer expected rescue. Ethan set the mug down and checked the latch on the door, then the window seams. Everything was sealed tight. The storm could rage all it wanted. It would pass. They always did. That was the lie Ethan lived with, the belief that if he waited long enough, everything painful eventually moved on. He had lost his wife that way, lost his child, lost the version of himself that believed the world still needed him. So he came here, not to heal, to disappear. Outside, snow began to fall harder, flakes striking the window like pale moths drawn to light. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, drowning the mountains in soundless fury. Ethan lay down on the cot, boots still on, hands folded over his chest. He stared at the ceiling beams, listening to the storm claw at the world beyond his walls. No radios, no voices, no orders, just silence. Then, a sound, so faint he almost dismissed it as the wind shifting its angle. Tap. Ethan's eyes opened. Shadow's head snapped up instantly. Tap, tap, uneven, hesitant, not wind. Ethan sat up slowly, heart rate steady, instincts long dormant rising to the surface. He swung his legs off the cot, bare feet hitting the cold floor without a sound. No one came this far up the mountain, not in winter, not in a storm like this. The sound came again, 3 soft knocks. Then nothing. Ethan stood there, breathing evenly, beard shadowing a jaw set in old restraint. Shadow moved to his side without command, body aligned, ready. Whatever waited on the other side of that door, silence was about to end.
Ethan reached the door in silence. His hand rested on the latch for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Not from fear, but from habit.
Doors, in his experience, were thresholds. Once crossed, things changed.
Listen, my
Lives changed.
loves.
Shadow stood pressed against his leg,
The
muscles
fire
taut, ears forward.
roars to
Not growling,
life,
not panicking, waiting.
just
The knock
like
came
our
again,
hope.
weaker this time. 3 taps, then 1, like someone rationing strength. Ethan pulled the door open. The storm lunged inside. Wind tore through the doorway, carrying needles of snow that burned against his skin. For a split second, all he saw was white, spinning, choking, alive. Then the woman fell into him. Her weight hit his chest hard and sudden, nearly knocking him back a step. She was light, too light, but rigid with cold, her body locked in a final effort to stay upright. Ethan caught her automatically, one arm bracing her back, the other steadying her shoulders. She smelled of snow, damp wool, and fear. Behind her, the world resolved into shapes. Children, 5 of them. 4 clung to her coat, fingers buried in fraying fabric, faces pale and hollowed by cold. Their breaths came in short, shallow bursts, fogging the air in front of them like frightened birds. A girl stood slightly apart, tall for her age, chestnut hair tangled and stiff with ice, eyes far too alert for childhood. In the woman's arms, a baby, wrapped in a soaked blanket, lips tinged blue, limbs stiff and unmoving, except for the faint rise and fall of her chest. The woman tried to speak. Nothing came out. Her mouth moved once, twice, then barely audible over the wind. "Please." That was all. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Inside," he said, voice steady, cutting through the storm like a command. "Now." He lifted the woman fully into his arms, the baby pressed between them, and stepped backward into the cabin. Shadow moved immediately, circling wide, positioning himself between the children and the open door. The girl ushered the others forward, hands tight around the wrists of 2 small boys, twins, Ethan registered distantly, who stumbled over the threshold on legs gone numb. Ethan kicked the door shut behind them. The wind screamed once in protest, then the cabin sealed, leaving only the crackle of the dying fire and the sound of breathing, ragged, uneven, alive. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The children huddled together instinctively, shoulders touching, eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. Shadow approached them slowly, head lowered, tail loose. He didn't bark, didn't bare his teeth. He simply circled once, sniffing, assessing, like a medic moving through a triage line.
The baby whimpered weakly. That broke the stillness. Ethan moved. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, pulled open the stove, and shoved in dry logs from the crate beside it. He pumped the bellows hard, once, twice, until the embers caught and flames leapt upward, casting sudden orange light across the cabin. "Sit," he said, guiding the children toward the stove. "Close. Don't touch." The older girl nodded immediately, understanding more than she should. She knelt, rubbing the twins' hands between her own, breathing warm air over their fingers the way she'd done before, many times. The woman sank into the nearest chair, body finally giving in now that the door was closed. Her arms tightened around the baby as if loosening them might be fatal. Ethan crouched in front of her. Up close, she looked younger than he'd expected, late 20s maybe, but exhaustion had carved years into her face. Her dark hair hung in wet strands, frozen at the ends. Her skin was gray beneath windburn, eyes hazel and wide with a fear that hadn't faded just because the storm was outside now. He brushed damp hair from the baby's forehead. She was frighteningly light, too still. "Hypothermia," Ethan murmured, more to himself than anyone else. Years of battlefield training took over. He wrapped the baby in one of his own wool blankets, dry and thick, rubbing her arms and legs gently to restore circulation. He checked her pulse, weak but present, and pressed his palm against her sternum, monitoring warmth. Shadow lay down beside them without command, curling his large body around the baby's tiny frame, radiating heat. Small fingers latched onto his fur instinctively. The baby's breathing steadied, just a little. Ethan exhaled through his nose. Good. He looked up at the woman. She was watching him like he was the only solid thing left in the world. "My name is Sarah," she whispered finally, voice raw and hoarse. "Sarah Brennan." Ethan nodded once. "Ethan." Her lips trembled. "Our car died on the road. We walked. I don't know how far. The baby. Lily. She stopped crying. I thought..." Her voice cracked. She pressed a hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking silently. "You did everything you could.
Ethan said firmly. You got them here. That's what matters. He stood and moved to the shelf above the table, pulling down what little remained of his emergency rations, 2 MRE packs and a half-full jar of peanut butter. He handed food to the twins first. They ate like children who hadn't eaten properly in days, careful at first, then desperately. The older girl ate more slowly, eyes never leaving her mother. Sarah didn't touch the food until Ethan placed a mug of warm water in her hands. Only then did she drink. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, breaths softened. Shadows warmed. A cabin meant for 1 man and 1 dog now carried the fragile heartbeat of a family.
And Ethan Hale, who had come here to disappear, felt something shift in his chest, like a long frozen place trying to remember warmth. As Lily's breathing steadied beneath Shadow's watchful presence, Ethan understood one simple truth. His silence was over, and the knock that shattered it was only the beginning. Morning came without light. The storm still owned the mountain, pressing its weight against the cabin like a living thing. Snow packed tight against the windows, sealing the world into a narrow circle of firelight and breath. Ethan Hale had not slept. He sat on the floor beside the stove, back against the rough timber wall, beard shadowing a jaw clenched in concentration. At 40, his body still knew how to endure long nights, but the ache in his shoulders reminded him that endurance always came at a cost. The baby, Lily, lay wrapped in wool between Shadow's forelegs. The German shepherd had not moved all night. His chest rose and fell steadily, a silent furnace guarding the smallest life in the room. Ethan checked Lily's breathing again. Slow, shallow, but steady. Good enough for now. Across the room, the children slept in a tangled cluster near the stove. Lucy lay half awake, eyes open, watching everything. The twins were pressed together, limbs knotted, faces relaxed only now that warmth had finally reached their bones. Sarah Brennan slept sitting upright in the chair, chin resting on her chest, fingers still curled protectively around nothing. She had let go only when exhaustion overpowered fear. Ethan rose quietly and added another log to the fire. Sparks jumped, briefly lighting the cabin in orange. He moved with deliberate calm, careful not to waste motion or sound. This was triage, not just bodies, spirits. He'd done this before, after ambushes, after helicopters left too early, after nights when the dead outnumbered the living. The rule was always the same: stabilize first, questions later. Sarah stirred when he placed a mug of warm broth in her hands. You don't have to, she began. You do, Ethan said gently. Drink. She obeyed, swallowing slowly, eyes closing as warmth spread. When she opened them again, they were clearer, but no less afraid. Are we safe? She asked. For now, Ethan answered honestly. Storm's still bad. We're not going anywhere today. She nodded, accepting the truth without complaint. The wind screamed outside, rattling the roof like distant artillery. Ethan met her gaze steadily. You did the hardest part, he said. You got them here. Sarah's lips trembled. I didn't know if the door would open. Ethan looked at the door, scarred, solid, shut tight against the storm. Sometimes, he said quietly, opening the door is the only thing that matters. Sarah lowered her head, breathing shakily. Beside them, Lily shifted and made a small sound. Shadow's ears twitched. He adjusted his position instinctively, pressing closer. Ethan watched the child breathe. Day 1 had begun, and survival was no longer a solitary act. Daylight never truly arrived. It only thinned the darkness. The storm loosened its grip just enough to let gray light bleed through the snow-packed windows, turning the cabin into a world of ash and shadow. The wind still howled, but less angrily now, like a predator circling instead of striking. Ethan marked that change without comment. Containment began the moment chaos stopped spreading. He inventoried everything. Food first. 2 MREs were already open. The peanut butter jar sat half empty on the table. A small sack of rice, 3 cans of beans, 1 of soup. Enough, maybe, if rationed carefully. Not enough if anyone wasted strength. He moved with quiet authority, beard brushing his collar as he knelt, counting, recalculating. This wasn't generosity, it was survival math. Sarah watched him from the chair, Lily asleep against her chest now, wrapped in layers of wool and Shadow's lingering warmth. "You don't have to stretch yourself thin for us," she said quietly. Ethan didn't look up. "I'm not." That answer surprised her. He glanced at her then, eyes steady. "I'm stretching the supplies. There's a difference." She nodded slowly, understanding. The children woke one by one. Lucy rose first, as always. She sat up, back straight, eyes alert, scanning the room until she accounted for everyone. Only then did she relax, slightly. The twins followed, groggy and disoriented. Sam rubbed his eyes. Ben pressed closer to his brother, fingers still numb. "Stay close to the stove," Ethan instructed. "Move slow." They obeyed immediately. The cabin settled into a rhythm. Sarah fed Lily tiny sips of warm broth, whispering to her as if sound itself could anchor the child to the world. Shadow remained beside them, occasionally lifting his head to check the baby's breathing before resting again. Ethan showed Lucy how to tear cloth into strips. He gave the twins small tasks, stacking kindling, counting logs, things to keep their hands busy and their fear contained. Containment wasn't just about warmth, it was about control. Fear spread faster than cold. By midday, the wind picked up again. Snow hammered the roof in bursts. Ethan checked the door, the windows, the stovepipe. Everything held, for now. Sarah finally spoke the question she'd been holding back. What happens next? Ethan leaned against the table, arms crossed, broad frame filling the narrow space. At 40, he looked carved from the same hard lines as the mountain, scarred, weathered, still standing. "We wait," he said. "Storm breaks, roads clear, then we reassess." "And if it doesn't?" she asked. Ethan met her gaze. "Then we adapt." That was all. Outside, the mountain waited. Inside, a fragile order had taken hold. Day 1 wasn't about hope. It was about holding the line. Day 2 did not announce itself. It crept in quietly, disguised as routine. The storm still hadn't broken. It hadn't worsened either. It simply stayed, heavy, patient, relentless. Snow pressed against the cabin walls like a held breath, waiting to see who would fail first. Ethan noticed the change in himself before he noticed it in the supplies. His movements were slower, not weaker, just measured. Every action carried calculation now. Every step asked whether it was necessary. That was depletion, not the absence of resources, the awareness of limits. He portioned breakfast carefully, smaller than yesterday. No complaints followed, but he saw the way Lucy paused, counting bites in her head. The twins ate quickly, then looked at their empty bowls longer than needed. Sarah said nothing. She never did when it mattered most. Lily slept more than she woke. When she did stir, her cries were thin, fragile threads of sound that tightened something in Ethan's chest. He checked her temperature often, adjusting blankets, watching for signs that the night might return too soon. Shadow stayed close, always. The dog's limp was more pronounced today. Cold did that. So did fatigue. Still, he followed Lily wherever she was moved, lowering himself beside her like a promise made without words. By midday, the wind shifted. Not direction, tone. It cut sharper now, slipping through seams Ethan hadn't noticed before. He stuffed old cloth into cracks along the wall, reinforced the window frame with a plank, sealed gaps with his own jacket if needed. Containment was turning into endurance. Sarah helped where she could, but Ethan saw the tremor in her hands when she thought no one was watching. She moved slower too, conserving strength instinctively, the way people do when they've learned that collapse is not an option. She caught him watching once. "You don't need to worry about me," she said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "That's not how this works." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Not offended. Seen. In the afternoon, the twins asked to go outside. "No," Ethan said immediately. They didn't argue. They didn't need to. The mountain itself answered for him, howling beyond the walls, reminding everyone that the world outside was still hostile. As daylight faded, what little of it there was, Ethan took inventory again. Less than yesterday. Tomorrow would be less than today. He felt the weight of it settle behind his ribs, a familiar pressure he hadn't felt since war. The countdown. You never say out loud. Sarah sat beside him that evening, Lily asleep against their shoulder. "How long?" she asked softly. Ethan didn't pretend not to understand. "If the storm holds," he said. "We start making harder choices." Sarah absorbed that without flinching. She nodded once. "Then we'll make them together." Ethan looked at her then, not as someone he was sheltering, but as someone standing the line with him. Day 2 ended without trauma. That was the danger. Because survival wasn't failing. It was thinning.
Day 3 arrived with a lie. The storm eased, not enough to free them, but enough to make the world seem merciful again. The wind softened to a low moan. Snow fell lighter, drifting instead of striking. For the first time since the knock, the mountain felt like it might be willing to negotiate. Ethan didn't trust it. False calm was something he knew well. He stood at the window, beard dusted with frost, watching the white settle. Shadow rested nearby, eyes half closed but alert. The children stirred with the change, energy returning in cautious waves. Sam and Ben whispered excitedly about the sky. Lucy allowed herself to smile, just a little. Sarah didn't. She sat at the table, shoulders drawn tight, Lily bundled in her arms. The baby was better, warmer, breathing steadier, but Sarah watched her like someone guarding a flame in the wind. Ethan noticed the folder when it slipped from her coat. It fell to the floor softly, edges curled, paper worn thin. Sarah froze. For a moment, no one moved. Even the fire seemed to pause. Ethan bent and picked it up without opening it. The label on the front was enough. Infant found, Trailer Park District. He looked up slowly. Sarah's hands tightened around Lily. Her breath stuttered, shallow and fast. "It's not," she began, then stopped, swallowed. "It's not what you think." "I'm not thinking anything," Ethan said evenly. "But if there's something I should know, now's the time." Silence stretched. The mountain waited. Sarah closed her eyes. "Lily isn't mine," she said. The words fell without drama. No apology, no defense. Ethan didn't interrupt. "My husband and I, we lived in a trailer. It wasn't much, but it was ours. One night I heard crying outside. I opened the door and she was there, wrapped in a towel, left beside a dumpster." Her voice trembled now, but she kept going. "I knocked on every door. People told me to call the police. Others said leave her at a church. One woman said, not my problem." Sarah's jaw tightened. "But she was freezing," she whispered, "and alone. So I brought her inside." Ethan felt something shift, quietly, irreversibly. "She changed me," Sarah said, eyes shining but dry. "I thought I already knew what it meant to be a mother. I didn't, not until her." She looked down at Lily. "When my husband died, when we were kicked out, I swore I wouldn't let her go. Any of them." Ethan stared at the fire, beard shadowing a jaw clenched against emotion he refused to name. This wasn't a woman running from the law. This was a woman running toward responsibility when everyone else had turned away. Shadow rose and nudged Sarah's knee gently. She rested a hand on his head without thinking. "You're stronger than you think," Ethan said quietly. "Stronger than most." Sarah's breath hitched. Outside, the storm whispered instead of roared. Day 3 didn't take anything from them. It revealed what had already been paid.
Day 4 stripped away illusions. The storm returned with teeth. It came in the early hours, before dawn, when the fire burned low and bodies were weakest. Wind slammed into the cabin with renewed fury, rattling the walls, driving snow through seams Ethan had sealed only hours before. The mountain was done negotiating. Ethan was awake when it hit. He sat upright on the cot, beard rough against his collar, heart steady, mind already moving. Shadow was on his feet instantly, hackles raised, not in fear, but readiness. The temperature dropped fast, too fast. Ethan moved through the cabin like a machine, feeding the stove, reinforcing cloth, shifting the children closer together. Lucy woke without crying. The twins clung to each other silently. Sarah tried to stand, her knees buckled. Ethan caught her before she hit the floor. She was burning up, not with fever, with exhaustion. Her body had reached the point where willpower no longer compensated for loss. "I'm fine," she whispered, trying to pull away. "You're not," Ethan said firmly. She shook her head, eyes glassy. "I can't sleep." Ethan understood instantly. Sleeping meant letting go. Letting go meant risk. "Listen to me," he said, kneeling so they were eye level. "I've got them." Her breath came shallow. "If I sleep, who watches them?" The question cut deeper than the cold. Ethan didn't answer right away. He placed her gently against the wall, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, then turned back to the room, counting heads, checking breathing, listening. Everything depended on staying ahead of collapse. Then Lily cried. Not loud, weak, wrong. Ethan was at her side in a heartbeat. Her skin was hot, but her hands were ice. Her breathing stuttered, uneven. Sarah tried to rise again.
You need to stay, Ethan said, sharper now. For her, Shadow pressed closer to Lily, body rigid, ears twitching. Ethan worked through the routine, cooling cloths, warmth balance, timing breaths. He stayed calm because panic would kill faster than cold. Minutes stretched into something shapeless. Then, slowly, Lily's breathing steadied. Just enough. Ethan sagged back on his heels, exhaling through his beard. Sarah watched him like someone witnessing a line she couldn't cross. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." "Stop," Ethan said quietly. "You've done more than anyone should ever have to." She shook, tears finally breaking through. "I don't know how much longer I can carry them." Ethan looked around the cabin, at 5 sleeping children, at a dog who hadn't laid down in hours, at a woman whose strength had kept everyone alive until it nearly killed her. "This is the rule," Ethan said softly, more to himself than to her. "You don't survive together. You survive because someone holds the line when others can't." Sarah closed her eyes. That night, she slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but she slept. Ethan didn't. He sat through the dark hours, counting breaths, feeding the fire, listening to the mountain rage. By morning, something in him had changed.
Day 4 did not break them. It rearranged who carried the weight. Morning came carefully, as if the mountain itself was unsure whether it had finished what it started. The wind had backed off during the night, retreating into long, low sighs that moved through the pines instead of tearing at them. Snow still lay thick around the cabin, but the violence was gone. What remained was aftermath. Ethan noticed it the moment he opened his eyes. Silence, but not the hollow kind. The fire was low but alive. The cabin held its warmth better now, as if the walls had learned what they were protecting. He rose slowly, joints stiff, beard rough against his collar. He hadn't slept, not really, but his mind felt clearer than it had in days. Across the room, Sarah slept on the cot, really slept. Her breathing was deep, even. One arm hung loosely at her side, fingers no longer clenched. It was the posture of someone whose body had finally accepted that it was not alone. Ethan didn't wake her. He checked the children first. Lucy stirred as he approached, eyes opening immediately. She met his gaze without fear. "Morning," she whispered. He nodded. "You did good last night." Something in her shoulders eased. The twins were still asleep, tangled together, mouths open slightly. Warmth finally settled into their cheeks. Lily lay curled between Shadow's forelegs, her tiny chest rising and falling with steady rhythm. Shadow lifted his head, amber eyes meeting Ethan's. "Good night," the look said. Hard, but good. Ethan scratched behind the dog's ear once, brief but grateful. Outside, the sky was a dull silver, clouds thinning. No sun yet, but promise. By mid-morning, Sarah woke. She sat up slowly, disoriented at first, then awareness returned. Her hand flew to Lily. "She's fine," Ethan said gently. "All of them are." Sarah sagged in relief, shoulders trembling as the tension finally drained. "I slept," she said, disbelief threading her voice. Ethan nodded. "You needed it." She looked at him then, really looked. The lines in his face seemed deeper today, the beard more unkempt, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "You didn't," she said. Ethan didn't deny it. Somebody had to stay awake. The truth settled between them, heavy but unspoken. Day 5 was different, not because danger was gone, but because roles had shifted. Ethan portioned breakfast again, still small but enough. Sarah insisted on helping this time, moving carefully, strength returning in cautious increments. Lucy took over tending Lily without being asked. The twins stacked kindling, proud of their task. Containment had given way to recovery. But recovery brought questions. "What happens now?" Sarah asked quietly, as they stood by the window watching the storm's remnants drift away. Ethan didn't answer immediately. "Now," he said at last, "we deal with what comes after surviving." Sarah nodded. Outside, the mountain remained, but it was no longer speaking in threats. The road down the mountain had changed, not visibly. Snow still lined its edges, ice still clung to the shaded curves, but something beneath it felt different. The storm was over. The mountain had released them. The world beyond would not be so generous. Ethan stood on the porch, beard trimmed roughly with a knife the night before, pulling on his coat. The old truck waited where it always had, dusted with snow, engine silent but dependable. Shadow watched him closely, reading the tension in his shoulders the way he always did. "I'll be back," Ethan said quietly, scratching behind the dog's ear. "Watch them." Shadow gave a low rumble, not a growl, a promise. Sarah stood just inside the doorway, Lily balanced on her hip. The baby's cheeks were pink now, breath strong and even. Sarah looked better too, though exhaustion still lingered around her eyes like a shadow that hadn't quite lifted. "Do you have to go today?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "If I miss the assessor again, there won't be another chance." She understood what that meant. "If they take the cabin," she began. "They won't," Ethan said, not because he was sure, but because someone needed to say it. Sarah held his gaze. "People in town don't like outsiders." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly beneath his beard. "Then I'll speak for you." That surprised her. Before she could respond, Ethan climbed into the truck. The engine coughed, then caught. Gravel crunched under the tires as he started down the narrow road, leaving the cabin smaller in the mirror with every turn. The town of Miller's Pass sat low in the valley, brick buildings hunched against winter, mountains rising behind it like witnesses. Nothing had changed, which meant everything had. Ethan parked near the county office and stepped inside. A bell chimed sharply, too loud in the small space. Behind the counter sat Janet Merrill, late 50s, spine straight, hair pinned tight, glasses perched low on her nose. She looked at Ethan like she'd already decided how the conversation would end. "Mr. Hale," she said crisply, "you're late." "I'm within the grace period," Ethan replied. "Barely." She shuffled papers with practiced indifference. "Your extension request was reviewed. Denied." Ethan felt heat rise in his chest. "I haven't even spoken to the assessor." "No need." She slid a stamped document across the counter. "Payment is due in full, today." "And if I can't?" Ethan asked. Her lips thinned. "Then the property enters pre-seizure status." The word landed heavy. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "I just need time. There were complications." Janet raised an eyebrow. "Complications like taking in that Brennan woman and her children?" Something cold snapped into place behind Ethan's eyes. "What did you say?" "Everyone's talking about it," Janet continued coolly. "A woman shows up with 5 kids, half frozen, reckless, irresponsible." Ethan's voice dropped. "She walked through a blizzard to keep them alive." Janet shrugged. "The town has its opinions. And most of them," Ethan said, "aren't worth the breath it takes to say them." The door behind her opened. Deputy Alan Reeves stepped in, broad-shouldered, late 40s, beard touched with gray. His eyes softened when he saw Ethan. "Heard you were in trouble, Hale." "More than some," Ethan replied. Reeves sighed. "Wish I could help. County won't bend this year." Ethan nodded once. He'd expected that. As he turned to leave, Janet added sharply, "Word of advice, Mr. Hale. If you want to keep your property, stop collecting strays." Ethan stopped. He turned slowly. "That stray," he said evenly, "kept 5 children alive when no one else opened a door. If you think compassion is a liability, maybe the problem isn't her." Silence followed. Reeves cleared his throat. "That's enough." Ethan walked out without another word. The mountain waited, and so did a decision he could no longer avoid. Ethan returned to the cabin after dark. The truck's headlights cut through the trees, then vanished as he shut off the engine. The mountain swallowed the sound whole. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked up the path, shoulders heavy, not from the cold, but from what he carried back with him. Inside, the cabin glowed. Firelight spilled through the windows, steady and warm. The children's voices drifted faintly. Soft laughter, the clink of a spoon against a bowl. Normal sounds. Precious sounds. Ethan paused before opening the door. For the first time since the storm, he hesitated. When he stepped inside, the room fell quiet. Sarah looked up from the table immediately. She didn't ask how it went. She read the answer in his face before he said a word. "They said no," she whispered. Ethan nodded once. The children sensed the shift, but didn't understand it. Lucy gathered the twins closer. Lily slept against Shadow's side, one small hand tangled in his fur. Ethan took off his coat and hung it slowly, deliberately. He didn't want anger to be the loudest thing in the room. That night, after the children were settled, and the cabin had returned to its low, breathing quiet, Sarah stayed at the table. She waited until Ethan sat across from her. Then she reached into the pocket of her worn coat. She placed the ring on the table. It was simple. Gold, dulled by years of wear. No stones, no engraving. Just a circle. Small, unassuming, heavy with memory.
Ethan felt his chest tighten. "This was Daniel's," Sarah said softly. "My husband." Ethan didn't touch it. "It's the only thing I kept when we were forced out," she continued. "I told myself it was the last piece of him I had left." Her fingers trembled as she pushed the ring closer to him. "But my children are alive because of you," she said. "Because you opened the door when no one else would." Ethan shook his head immediately. "Sarah, no." "If selling this helps you keep the cabin," she said, voice breaking, "helps keep them warm, then I want you to take it." Ethan slid the ring back across the table. "This isn't yours to give," he said quietly. Tears welled in our eyes. "It's all I have left." "You already gave everything," Ethan replied. "You carried 5 children through a blizzard. You didn't give up when the world did." She covered her mouth, trying to hold herself together. "Then, how will you keep your home?" she whispered. Ethan had no answer. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was human. Sarah closed her hand around the ring, clutching it to her chest, not in surrender, but in reclaiming herself. And Ethan understood something then. Survival had only been the first battle. What came next would demand a different kind of courage.
The decision did not come all at once. It formed slowly, like ice thickening on a river, layer by layer, invisible until it could no longer be broken. Ethan lay awake that night, staring at the low ceiling beams. The cabin was quiet in the way it only was when everyone else felt safe enough to sleep. Sarah's breathing drifted softly from the other side of the room. The children slept in a loose constellation near the stove. Shadow lay between them, one ear twitching now and then. Ethan counted breaths, not because he was afraid, because he was thinking. The county would not bend. The cabin would be seized. Sarah and the children would be back on the road. And this time there would be no storm to blame. Just paperwork, just rules, just a system that did not care who survived winter and who did not. By morning, the answer was no longer a question. He waited until the children were outside with Shadow, throwing bits of snow and laughing quietly, before he spoke. "Sarah," he said. She looked up from the table. Her eyes searched his face instantly, reading seriousness in the set of his jaw, the stillness beneath his beard. "What is it?" Ethan didn't sit. He stayed standing, hands resting on the back of the chair as if grounding himself. "You and the kids," he said carefully. "You don't have legal protection here." Her shoulders tensed. "If something happens to me," he continued, "or if the county takes the cabin, you'll be homeless again." She swallowed. "I know. There's one way to stop that." She looked at him, fear and hope colliding in her eyes. Ethan took a breath that felt heavier than any he'd taken in years. "I'm asking you to marry me." The words landed without ceremony, not romantic, not dramatic. True. Sarah stared at him, stunned. "Ethan, not because I expect anything from you," he said quickly. "Not because I want to replace what you lost. This is about protection. About truth." He met her gaze fully now. "I won't let the system tear your family apart after you survived everything else." Tears filled her eyes, spilling freely before she could stop them. "You don't owe us this," she whispered. "I know," Ethan said. "That's why it matters." She covered her mouth, breath shaking. For a long moment she couldn't speak. Then she nodded. "Yes," she said. "Ethan, yes." Something in Ethan's chest loosened, just a fraction. But it was enough. Outside, Lily laughed. And the world, for the first time in a long while, did not feel like it was closing in.
2 weeks changed the cabin more than winter ever had. Not because the cold retreated completely, it hadn't, but because life moved back in. Snow still clung to the shadows of the pines, but the air carried hints of thaw. Water dripped from the roof in slow, steady rhythms. The mountain was loosening its grip, reluctantly. Inside the cabin, change was unmistakable. Laughter lived there now. Not loud, not careless, but real. The children filled the space with movement. Boots by the door, mittens drying near the stove, drawings taped crookedly to the wall. Sam and Ben argued over firewood stacking techniques like it was a competition worth winning. Lucy practiced reading aloud from one of the books Deputy Reeves had dropped off, her voice steady, serious. Lily had learned to stand. She wobbled between Shadow and the table, arms outstretched, giggling when she fell onto the dog's thick fur. Shadow accepted every tumble with stoic patience, his tail thumping once in quiet approval. Ethan watched it all from the doorway, arms crossed, beard catching the morning light. He still felt like a guest in his own life, but the cabin no longer resisted the idea. Sarah moved through the space with growing confidence, not ownership, not entitlement, but care. She fixed a loose hinge on the cabinet, cleaned soot from the stovepipe, hung fresh cloth over the window seams. "You don't have to do all that," Ethan told her once. "I know," she replied, "but I want to." That distinction mattered. The town's response came in fragments. No apologies, no grand gestures, just quiet adjustments. A sack of seed potatoes appeared on the porch one morning. No note. A stack of donated clothes followed 2 days later, folded neatly in a crate. Janet Merrill avoided eye contact when she passed Ethan in town, but she did not interfere. Deputy Reeves stopped by again, this time with paperwork. "Nothing official," he said, scratching his beard. "But it'll help." Ethan didn't ask questions. He'd learned not to. The wedding plans were simple. No invitations, no dress shopping, no rings beyond the one Sarah already owned. They chose the town hall. Reverend Stone agreed without hesitation. "It doesn't take much to make something real," he said gently. "Just truth." The night before the wedding, Ethan stood outside alone. Stars cut sharp lines across the sky. The air was cold but clean. He thought of the cabin as it had been, silent, empty, waiting. He hadn't come here to build a future, but the mountain had other plans. Inside, Sarah tucked the children into bed. She paused at the door, watching Ethan through the window. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what came next.
The morning of the wedding was cold, but honest. Not the violent cold of the storm, not the suffocating cold of fear, just winter reminding them it was still there. Ethan stood in front of the small mirror nailed crookedly to the cabin wall, adjusting the collar of the only button-down shirt he owned. It had been ironed as best as possible with steam from the kettle and Sarah's careful hands. At 40, he looked older than he once had, but steadier. The beard he'd trimmed the night before framed a jaw that no longer clenched by default. His blue-gray eyes still carried loss, but now they held something else alongside it. Purpose. Shadow sat beside him, unusually still. Someone, Lucy most likely, had tied a narrow strip of white cloth around the dog's neck. The German shepherd wore it with quiet dignity, tail sweeping the floor once as Ethan reached down to scratch his ears. "You ready?" Ethan murmured. Shadow's ears twitched. Outside, the children waited. Lucy stood tall in a borrowed blue dress, posture straight, eyes serious with the weight of the moment. Sam and Ben tugged at their stiff collars, whispering and elbowing each other until Lucy shot them a warning look. Lily was in Sarah's arms, pink-cheeked, bright-eyed, alive in a way that still felt miraculous. Sarah stepped into the light. The dress she wore was simple, cream-colored, second-hand, altered just enough to fit her slender frame. But when she lifted her head, the sunlight caught her face, and Ethan forgot how to breathe for a moment. She wasn't transformed. She was revealed. The woman who had walked through a blizzard carrying 5 children. The woman who had refused to let go when the world did. They walked together to the town hall. No music, no procession, just footsteps. Inside, Reverend Stone waited, hands folded, eyes kind. A small group stood behind, Deputy Reeves, a few neighbors, even Janet Merrill near the doorway, posture stiff but present. The ceremony was brief, not because it lacked meaning, but because meaning didn't need length. Reverend Stone spoke of storms, of how they stripped away what wasn't essential, leaving only what was true. He spoke of commitment as action, not words. When it was Ethan's turn, he didn't prepare vows. He spoke plainly. "I can't promise I'll always have the right answers," he said, voice low but steady, "but I promise he won't face another storm alone." Sarah's hands trembled as she replied. "You gave us a home when we had nothing," she said through tears. "I promise to stand beside you, wherever life leads." Before Reverend Stone could finish, Lily wriggled free from Lucy's grasp and toddled forward. "Papa," she squealed. Laughter broke through the room, warm and unrestrained. Ethan bent, lifted Lily into his arms, and closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed. Reverend Stone smiled. "I believe that counts as approval." When they were pronounced husband and wife, the kiss was brief. Not for show, for truth. Outside, the mountain watched, and for the first time, it did not feel like a boundary. It felt like a witness. Spring did not arrive with celebration. It came quietly. Snow melted into mud along the mountain paths, then dried into dark, fertile earth. Water ran free again, carving lines through the land that winter had tried to freeze into silence. The pines shed their heavy white coats, standing taller, greener, alive. The cabin changed with the season. Ethan and Sarah repaired what winter had weakened: a leak in the roof, a broken hinge, a fence that had leaned too long into neglect. They worked side by side, not speaking much, not needing to. Their rhythm was slow, deliberate, built on trust rather than urgency. The children followed. Lucy helped Sarah plant the first small garden: potatoes, beans, carrots, rows carefully measured, covered with straw. Sam and Ben chased each other between shores, laughter echoing off the trees, like something the mountain had forgotten. Lily toddled after Shadow everywhere, clutching his fur with unshakable devotion. Shadow accepted his role with quiet gravity. He guarded the children, slept in doorways, followed Lily like a shadow deserved to. His limp was still there, more noticeable on cold mornings, but it no longer slowed him. One afternoon, Ethan and Sarah walked to the small cemetery behind the cabin. 2 simple stones rested beneath an old pine. Ethan's wife, his infant son. The air was still. No wind, no judgment. Sarah knelt first, placing a small wildflower between the stones. She didn't speak loudly. Whatever she said was meant for them alone. Ethan stood beside her, beard brushing his collar, hands steady. He did not feel like he was betraying the past. He was carrying it forward. They returned to the cabin at dusk. The family gathered on the porch as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in gold and rose. The children sprawled at their feet. Shadow rested his head on Lily's lap, eyes half closed. Sarah leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. "Do you ever think," she whispered, "that winter brings things for a reason?" Ethan watched the mountains fade into silhouettes. "Some winters break you," he said. "Some remake you." He wrapped an arm around her, firm and certain. "This one gave me everything." The mountain stood quiet, not as an enemy, not as a test, but as a home.